I haven't done an Instagram Live in a while, and I'm excited to host a conversation with my friend Tresa Undem. She is a pollster. She's a partner and co-founder of Perry Undem, a nonpartisan public opinion research firm working on healthcare, gender equity, and other public policy issues. She has conducted public opinion research for 20 years on behalf of nonprofit organizations, foundations, news organizations, government agencies. Excuse me, she studies opinion on many policy issues and leads the firm's practice on attitudes and experiences related to gender equality. So the reason I thought it would be great, hi everybody, that we would talk about the midterms is that actually we should do something on Hurricane Ian. I don't know the latest on that, but thank you for mentioning that, and we'll get back to you on that. But because it's 6 weeks until the midterms, everyone, we thought it would be really interesting to talk to Tresa and find out what she's learning out in the field, what people care about, kind of how voting is shaping up. I thought this would be a good time to kind of let people know what people are thinking, Tresa, make sure that they get out and vote, because that is more important than ever, obviously. And notoriously, the midterms don't have a huge turnout, although 2018 was kind of different, right? And my necklace is from Beckett and Quill, and it's a Capricorn. Sorry, go ahead, Tresa.
Yeah. So I've been in the field. I study, people's opinions, what they're thinking around a number of different issues. And I will say you're right. So whenever we're in a midterm election, the party that's not in the White House tends to do really well. They tend to be motivated, they're fighting against something, they're not happy with what's going on. And I would say, 8 months ago, I'd say pundits and pollsters would have said Republicans, it's kind of a slam dunk. Biden's favorability was pretty low. We had inflation, cost of living, there's so much wrong right now. But those things were really top of mind for people. And then two things happened. We had the Uvalde shooting. And right around that same time was the leak in the news leak that the Supreme Court was going to overturn Roe. And right, those two events together, and then the Supreme Court actually overturning Roe kind of switched things up. After that happened, we saw a number of different indicators. It sort of like shifted the winds a little bit against Republicans. And now we're 6 weeks out, we're kind of still there a little bit. Maybe Democrats have a slight advantage in the polling, but maybe not. It's like 1 point. But yeah, a lot's going on right now. People are exhausted. They're worried. They're anxious. Their mental health is a huge issue. They're angry. They're scared about the direction of the country. We asked in a survey recently, how hopeful do you feel? 8% feel very hopeful about the state of our country. 34%, we asked, do you think our country is still a democracy? Only 34% said yes. The rest said no, or I'm not sure. I mean, it's just a pretty depressing time right now for most voters.
Now, we were talking, some of my colleagues and I, about the fact that Donald Trump endorsed candidates actually did pretty well. Did we say, 81%? Pardon? 4 out of 5 of the candidates he endorsed actually won their primaries. But there was also, I understand, some wishful thinking on the part of Democrats that these candidates, who were pretty extreme, who were election deniers, etc., would in fact win their primaries because they would be easier to beat than some of the more moderate Republican candidates. What are you hearing about that out in the field? Anything, Tresa?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We're not in a post-Trump world. So I wouldn't say any election against a Trump endorsed candidate is an easy election. So I think, I've been doing research among voters on, election manipulation and those efforts. And I think where voters are, especially the more moderate voters, they don't necessarily believe the big lie, but they don't necessarily not believe it. But I think what they're really focused on is actually not even whether Trump endorses a candidate or whether it, says something like, oh, I wouldn't have, I would have been against the 2020 results. What they're really interested in is that candidate trying to make their side win at any cost? Are they trying to have control over elections, or are they willing to stand up even against their own party? And I think those kinds of things are what voters are looking at. But yeah, I just think it's not an easy place for any candidate to win right now.
Yeah, and so are you saying they're not that concerned about, one thing that we've been covering a lot is how state legislatures, secretaries of states are starting to change laws that will make it easier actually in 2024 and perhaps even in the midterms to overturn or to, basically, determine the winner of the elections by enacting various laws. It's something that people are very concerned about. People who are experts in democracy are extremely concerned about how the system is being manipulated. So an election could actually be rigged in the future. Do people seem to understand how critically important that is?
You know what? It's not hugely on people's radars. So it's not something we hear, whenever we do focus groups or whatever, what issues are you concerned about? Election manipulation or subversion is not really super top of mind. So I do worry that people aren't very informed about the issue and they're not really quite thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, I think that the big opportunity, the big sort of window will be around the election and afterwards, and what happens, and do people learn from that, and what's the news, and what are we going to see there? That would be the opportunity for I think learning.
Well, let's talk about what people are concerned about. You mentioned Uvalde, you mentioned the overturning of Roe v. Wade. When it comes to those two issues, abortion rights and reducing gun violence, where do they stand in the list? Because traditionally, they have not been at the top.
Yeah. So here's the deal. It depends on who you're looking at, what segment of voters. So among Democratic voters, among some key segments, abortion, women's rights, gun violence are at the top. So among Democratic voters, it's at the top. It's above, economic issues. Among Latina women, it's at the top. Among women of reproductive age, 18 to 44, at the top. Suburban women, at the top. If you look at Republican voters, abortion is not at the top. And we're starting to see signs. It used to be, Republicans and anti-abortion voters used to be single issue voters. We've now, post the overturning of Roe, we've seen that reversed. So now Democrats are now single issue voters. So that's new. With Republicans, what's at the top? The economy, inflation, crime, the border. And then you have independents, and for them, it's a mix of issues with economic issues at the top. So it kind of depends on who you're looking at.
And what about sort of forgiveness of student loans? How did that land with voters?
That's something I haven't done research on. So I haven't, I don't know. It hasn't come up organically in the last couple of weeks in our research.
And what, you talked about inflation. Obviously, the economy is going through some tough times. The stock market is getting hammered. Interest rates are going up. As these are happening, as we get closer and closer to the midterms, do you think that among independent and even Democratic voters, those issues are going to rise a bit in the list of priorities?
Yeah, I think a couple things could happen. One is with independence. I think it definitely could because it's already at the top. We vote on a lot of things. We vote on things that relate directly to our survival, which economy, right? So the closer it is to, you can't live in this country, you literally can't live without money. So that's why the economy and inflation is such a core voting issue. So I think that could rise to the top. Among Democrats, my sense is that abortion and gun violence and sort of concern about democracy and rights and freedoms is probably going to stay at the top more than the economy and inflation. That's just my sense. But it kind of depends on just, what's in the news. People vote on when deciding whether to vote and, how they're going to vote. It's like what's in their mind at that time. Is it, paying $5? Did gas just go up? Is it, or is it, are they still thinking about abortion? Are they still thinking about shootings? Is something else coming up? So it does kind of depend on, what's on their mind. Six weeks.
Joe Biden's approval rate, I understand right now is what, at 40%, something like that. How much drag is he going to be on Democratic candidates? And in some cases, because he did have some legislative victories at least about a month ago, do you think he will actually help some of these candidates, or is that kind of old-fashioned thinking about hit the impact on state and local races?
Yeah, again, it probably depends on the race. If you're in a more rural area, Biden probably doesn't help you, versus in a more urban, more progressive type area. So yeah, I think there could be a drag, and I think it's really hard, and I think Democrats have not done a good job. But that said, it's very hard to communicate sort of the successes. I mean, it doesn't matter and we hear this in focus groups all the time, including among Democrats. It's just like they don't think politicians are helping them at all. And you could mention something in a focus group. What about the child tax credit? Right? Remember when parents were getting like $500 a month or whatever? Well, yeah, but it was like politicians aren't going to get a hand on the back for doing X, Y, or Z. The people are struggling so much and dealing with so much right now that just like, okay, you forgave some student loans, interest rate is still huge, or that doesn't affect me, or so it's really hard to capitalize on the success, even though you think it would be kind of easy, because there's actually been a lot that Biden has done.
Just asked, do world politics impact the midterms? And I think they were speaking specifically of the recent election in Italy, where a pretty extremist far-right candidate was elected. Do you think that has any impact on domestic races, or it's just more of a illustration of what's happening globally in many of these governments that become very anti-immigrant and then are being pushed to the right in all kinds of places around the world?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I mean, I don't think that people are thinking about that. They think about their own lives, their own districts, or their own states, their own communities. I think the Ukraine war did break through to people, but yeah, I don't think other elections. But I will say, we're experiencing exactly what people around the globe are experiencing. And one of the things I've studied is, after the 2020 election, we did a huge analysis of what best predicts people voting for Biden. And I looked at all 50 different election issues. I looked at all types of beliefs around authoritarianism, immigration, race, gender, like everything. I had 200 questions in this survey. The best predictors of whether somebody voted for Trump related to race and gender. So it related to how you feel about race and power, whether it's Black Lives Matter, other variables, whether you feel white men are the most attacked group in the country. So it was really like these core beliefs that that just we're all, many countries are facing right now that kind of relate to, same with immigration. It relates to your views toward, honestly, race and power.
and changing demographics, right? When you think that this country is going to become a majority minority population by 2044, I think you see that reflected in so many attitudes. And I wonder, given that Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott did, you know, use those migrants as sort of political pawns to make a point, you know, I think serious issues with immigration. But I'm wondering if they were successful in bringing the issue of immigration in this country a little more on the forefront. And I mean, have you been out in the field and have you talked to people about immigration since that happened, since they shipped those people to Martha's Vineyard and New York and Washington, D.C.?
Not since that happened, but I think that immigration is a big issue. I'd say for Democrats, it's not really on the radar. It's not something that I hear a lot from Democrats or independents who lean Democratic, but among Republicans, it's a huge issue. And I would say, you know, sort of Trump Republicans, they're probably going to support the actions of DeSantis, and you know, because they're so upset about the border and border security. And that's just where we are. We're just divided. But yeah, I don't hear it coming up among Democrats a lot.
Yeah, I just wonder if it has solidified some Republican and even independent voters to make immigration more in the forefront for them, if it wasn't already, you know?
Right. Especially with independents, it certainly could have.
Yeah, and
is what we. Yeah,
go ahead. You go ahead, Tresa.
No, it's just remarkable. Like in research, and I kind of studied this in grad school 20 years ago. But what's in the news is what voters are thinking about, and what they're thinking about is what they tend to vote on. So it's called agenda setting in the, you know, academic literature. So yes, the fact that I remember when the Afghanistan withdrawal happened and we were doing focus groups, and I remember, you know, same question we always ask: what's the most important issue facing the country? Afghanistan. And I was like, what? Okay, that didn't happen 3 weeks ago, nor did it happen 3 weeks after that, right? So I'm just saying what you're saying is probably true, because it did get a lot of press and it did get a lot of attention. It's going to be in people's minds, and then that's how they're you know, the media doesn't necessarily do a good job of persuading people to think a certain way, but to put it on their minds, and then therefore they might vote on it. Yes, that's definitely that's a definite possibility.
So I guess we should be watching carefully what's in the news in the next 6 weeks, because that's top of mind for voters when they go to the polls. What about turnout? As I was saying earlier, midterms have notoriously low turnout, but they did have high turnout in 2018. Do you get a sense about voter enthusiasm, and what are you predicting, if you do? I don't even know if you can do that, Tresa, about turnout and about sort of registration numbers, et cetera.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think it'll be, I don't know if it'll be as high as 2018, and I don't know that I'd predict one way or the other, but I will say that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I think, will have an impact turnout among Democrats. And that's where we're seeing, you know, because we're actually seeing external indicators of that. We're seeing more registered, you know, post-Dobbs, you know, more women registering to vote after that decision. And I think that's what I'm seeing in our polling as well. You know, one of the groups least likely to vote, at least in polling, they're least likely to say, yes, I'm definitely voting, is women of reproductive age. So women 18 to 44, out of every demographic, they're least certain to vote this fall, but they're the most likely to say, the overturning of Roe v. Wade makes me more likely to want to vote. So,
and are you taking any kind of guidance from what happened in Kansas, where overwhelmingly women came out to support reproductive rights, to make sure the Constitution in that state did not wasn't changed. And obviously Kansas is a pretty red state. So if it happened in Kansas, do you think the likelihood of it happening in other states is high at this point because women are still quite angry?
Yes, I think that, yeah, that's certainly one of the indicators that makes us think like this is definitely a mobilization issue. The difference is Kansas was taking away a right in a constitution, changing the state constitution, and that's much harder to do, and people can get fired up more about that. But again, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, was what's in people's minds. Is it in the ads they're seeing? What are the candidates in their local district? What are they running on? What are those, who are the two candidates? Where are they on abortion? You'll see Democrats have, Republicans have scrubbed their websites of abortion.
Talking about the candidate in Arizona.
Yeah. And I mean, they don't want to be talking about abortion right now. And, Democrats do. So for exactly that reason, what we're seeing in Kansas and elsewhere.
Any other interesting insights, Tresa, you're getting out in the field from your team? And how do you do your work? Do you basically employ all these people do they go in person? Is it phone? Because polling obviously has not been super accurate in recent years, and there have been some real issues with it. So are you doing it differently to ensure that polling is more accurate?
Yeah, good question. So don't believe any single poll. So even my own, I look at, I need like 3 polls to say the same for me to be like, okay, there's something here. And I think our field is trying to do a lot. It's a big, longer conversation. But I would say one of the, when we do, most of the polling I do is not of trying to predict who's going to vote and what those voters think. And that type of polling is really hard because you're trying to serve a population that doesn't exist. So you need to figure out who's going to vote in this election. What does your sample look like? And create your sample to who you think will turn out. None of us pollsters know who's going to turn out. So that's part of why it's wrong. Like in 2016, well, we didn't, we base who we think is going to turn out based off the past. Well, in the past, less educated voters weren't likely to turn out. Well, in that election, they surged. So then, of course, our models are going to be wrong because we're just doing our best to predict, right? But there's a lot of other, so there's kind of confounding things that can happen that to make polling to get so that polling is wrong, right? But I'd say one thing I would just say is, so I don't take a lot of stock in election polling, even though I'm a pollster. But I'd say one thing that is probably the most surprising to me is that I did this survey that analyzed, again, and how I talked about before, like all these different variables, beliefs around socialism, authoritarianism. And then I asked about all these issue positions, on immigration, on funding for education, on, should we teach racism in schools, right? On the Second Amendment. And I looked at what in our survey, what beliefs or attitudes were most predictive of voting Democrat or Republican, and then on what's most predictive of having all of these policy positions, right? And the single strongest predictor out of, again, like 100 and some questions was this question: agree or disagree, I support the Black Lives Matter movement. So if I knew, and that was kind of stunning to me. So if I knew where somebody, and this was particularly true among white people, so if I knew where somebody lands on that scale, I can predict with a very high accuracy who they're going to vote for and on a bunch of different policy positions. So I think it's so clear.
It's such a clear, divisive question that people are very strongly yes or strongly no.
Yes. And it kind of relates to where we're in this middle of this cultural, civil rights, culture wars, whatever. And it's just underneath so many things, race right now in particular, and then in gender as well. And it's just like driving so many different things. So I don't think that's often reported on, but yeah, there's so much going on.
I think most of us who read a lot and sort of notice the polarization probably wouldn't be all that surprised by that.
Yes, good point. Good point. But I think a lot of journalists don't cover that. I mean, I remember even after 2020 election, we had these data where, actually one of the strongest predictors of whether you voted for Trump was thinking that, agree or disagree, Kamala Harris is trying to fool everyone. She cares about becoming president herself. So that question was like at the intersection of race, gender, and power, right? And again, out of 50 different election issues and whatever else, this comes up as most predictive. But when I was talking to reporters, they were still kind of like, well, isn't it really just education? It's not your views on race or whatever. It's, isn't it just economic issues? So I think it's I don't know that it's discussed, and I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that it's discussed enough.
Yeah. And when you talk about those questions, does this span all socioeconomic backgrounds when it comes to this? It's not a certain population with say rural voters. It's sort of across the spectrum when they say things like support or not the Black Lives Matter movement, or Kamala just wants to be president, that kind of thing. It's well represented among various groups.
Exactly. Yep. And there's a way in the statistics where we can kind of control for education and income and all of those things. And it's still very significant. Across different groups.
So it sounds to me from what you were saying, just to wrap it up, Tresa, at the beginning of our conversation, the Democrats were gaining some ground. I would say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. President Biden was his approval ratings were going up slightly, and it looked like Democrats were going to do well. Now things have settled down a little bit more, and it's a bit neck and neck in many of these races. Is that accurate?
Yep, I'd say you got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's gonna come out to turnout. And it really depends on.
I know I asked you this, but we're seeing a lot of voter registration. Is there anything that is able to be predictive when it comes to turnout? Weather, right?
What's that?
Weather.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, weather, and I think if you talk to advocates who are, trying to get people out to vote, it's sort of like, are people making a plan? So do they know what they need to do? Do they have daycare? Are they planning ahead? Do they have an intention to vote? Do they know whether they're registered or not? So all those questions, I think, for those of us talking to our friends, for those of us who are super engaged, making sure that our friends are registered, making sure they know what they need to do, helping that. One of the biggest barriers to getting out to vote is, from what I hear from voters, is like, I don't know. It's really hard to track down all the information I need on all the candidates. I hear people, it takes me like 3 nights of work to do it. And then I want to feel confident in my choice. So the extent that we can help people, share information about candidates and what they need to do and election locations and all of that is important.
Yeah. Well, Tresa, thank you so much. It's great to see you and kind of get the lay of the land. And if you have any interesting observations in the next 6 weeks, or you're hearing something out in the field that you think is interesting, please let me know and I'll share it with my followers and our readers.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.